First of all, we're delighted to have so many accomplished experts here from both Dallas and Texas and different parts of the world. First, we have Kathryn Guerra, who's the chair of the City of Dallas's Environmental Commission. Ella Jackson is a research associate at the World Resources Institute, where her work focuses on youth engagement, particularly the electric school bus initiative. We have Doug Lewin, who's an energy analyst who writes a very comprehensive newsletter, the Texas Energy and Power newsletter. He's also the founder of Stoic Energy Consulting. And we have my good friend Shadé, who has years of experience working in the private sector on solar energy and is now a global energy specialist at the United Nations Development Programme's Sustainable Energy Hub. So thank you all so much for being here with us today. To panel attendees, you can ask questions in the chat, and then we'll leave 5 minutes at the end to answer some of those. But okay, let's just ask one opening question and then get into some of the electricity questions. What's causing this issue? Where do most of our emissions come from in Dallas-Fort Worth and Texas as a whole? And what are some can you give an overview of some strategies to reduce them? And feel free to discuss various sectors, whether transportation, industry, buildings, electricity and the electric grid, etc.
Any of my fellow panelists want to take it, or I can jump in and then y'all can add. Yeah, I don't know about Dallas-Fort Worth specifically, and maybe Kathryn with more of a DFW focus could speak to that. But Texas-wide, it's roughly a third. Transportation, power sector, and then like the electric grid, and then industrial. And that's oversimplifying because there's others. There's agricultural emissions and there's direct emissions from buildings, but those are much smaller. Sometimes you'll see it counted different ways. People will say buildings are 40 or 50%, but usually they are counting all the electricity generated in that mix. So this is usually the way I talk about it. They're trending in different directions. Electricity is trending downward because Texas has nation-leading renewable resources and now a whole lot of batteries. Transportation's actually been heading up because we're lagging other states in electric vehicle adoption. And industrial also trending upwards, although downwards on an intensity basis, but upwards in an aggregate emissions basis, just because, well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons we have a lot more industrial and manufacturing activity than other states, and it continues to grow. But I would love to hear from maybe a fellow panelists could put more nuance or detail or whatever.
I can give you a few detail here. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So not very specialized in Texas, but I hear you, Doug, about the role of buildings. And I think that's an issue that's also present in New York, also present in Paris, where I'm from. The issue that, yeah, a lot of buildings are basically energy deficient, like they just waste a lot of energy, they're not well insulated. There's a podcast that I like a lot where I've heard that one of the least sexy thing you can do for climate mitigation is to insulate your attic. And I really hear that. Like it's especially in the winter. I mean, I see it a lot in New York where you have your heat very, very high, but actually all of the heat just escape from the windows. So yeah, one thing that could really be done is like insulating buildings, making sure that there's no waste of energy, and then also changing some of the energy appliances for some more energy efficient one. The issue is that a lot of the time, those are costly for renters, like they're not necessarily able to do that. So with that, there's really a need to have regulation, but also to have incentives for homeowners to be able to do that. And also another point, obviously, transportation. So you talked about, the role of transportation in emission in Texas. One point that I would like to say is also about public transportation, like how it can help reduce emission. And I know that it's like very different culturally, depending on where you are in the country, in the world. But yeah, like there's been a lot of different things that have been put in place around the world. I've worked last summer on a project on low emission zones in cities of Latin America, where actually Zayna was also part of that project. And there was a lot of work around pedestrianization, making sure that people were able to like walk in some spaces, improving the public transportation, like the subway system, the bus system, making them safer. So yeah, so that's one point that for me is important, but again, like really important to make sure that it's adapted to the needs of the specific population that live there. Yeah, I'll pause here.
Yeah, and I'll jump in just to confirm for the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the majority of our emissions come from the building sector and from the transportation sector. Dallas-Fort Worth is a really huge, sprawling metropolitan area that was really not built with walkability in mind. So walkability has only become, this center point of a climate action goal, and it's really hard to sort of retroactively make a city walkable. And so there are some things that the local government, at least in Dallas, has begun to do to sort of try to address some of these. And it really starts with, like Shadé said, and like Doug said, looking at the efficiency of our buildings, but also, enhancing neighborhood level air quality. So we're looking at how industry is impacting, land use is impacting the air quality here in the Dallas area, which is really important because we are in what's called non-attainment. That means that there is a Clean Air Act federal law, and it has a national ambient air quality standard. And that law says that the Dallas-Fort Worth area isn't meeting that standard. And so back in 2008, they put us in what's called ozone non-attainment. And we have yet, it's 2025, we have yet to meet that 2008 ozone standard. So whatever we're doing, it is simply not enough.
And I can jump in just quickly on the very hyper-local school district level. Transportation is what I look at mostly because we are talking about school buses. So there's a ton of stuff that happens on the building side. But when it comes to buses themselves, one thing, or the transportation framework we think about, is avoid, shift, improve. So avoiding trips in the first place, shifting those trips from private vehicles, which are really the source of most of the transportation emissions right now. And as individuals, one of the biggest things we can do to shift away from GHG emissions, and then improve switching from diesel to electric. And while we focus a lot on this improve side from the nonprofit standpoint, that shift side, especially at the school district level, is just as important. But as Kathryn was mentioning, the urban planning aspect of that is really hard culturally, and then just the physical barriers of you can't walk across a highway. You're not going to take your kids under a highway underpass. So that is one that is really easy for some communities and then really difficult for others. And we need to make bigger systemic changes in order to make that option viable in any way.
These are all really excellent points, and you guys tackled it from like different kind of vantage and viewpoints. Energy efficiency is certainly very, very key part of reducing emissions, making sure we can do more with what we have, and certainly culturally trying to figure out what works for each city and school district. I'm going to ask a question about the renewables in Texas now. So despite being one of the largest natural gas exporters in the world, and there's a lot of LNG that comes out of Houston, liquefied natural gas, Texas is also the #2 producer of solar energy and the #1 producer of wind energy, which our current president is not a huge fan of, by the way, in the United States. So and I think, like when people talk about Texas, sometimes they forget that we're leading in renewables, despite being like a major kind of oil and gas state where a lot of our state agencies are kind of captured by these interests. So, and Doug, this is mostly a question for you, but I'm curious, like, if everyone else has any insights as well. What's contributed to the solar and wind energy boom? Like, what are some of the challenges that renewable energy faces here, whether political, financial, et cetera, with transmission lines to connect these wind farms and solar farms to the grids that provide all of us our electricity?
Yeah, a big question. And first of all, let me just say before I get in, I didn't do this at the outset, but thank you so much for organizing this. I know so much goes into organizing something like this, and it's so important to have conversations like this. Really appreciative that you reached out to me to include me in it. Look, there's there's a lot to be upset about it, globally when we're talking about climate change and what's going on there. And I do think it's very important to take time and recognize where really good things are happening. And the renewable energy story in Texas is a great one. It is not actually primarily a climate story. It's really much more about I mean, it is to the extent like everything is, right? Like we're living in an era where like climate is going to intersect more and more. It already is, but with like everything we do. But really, primarily in Texas, what has happened with renewables, there were some first movers with policy back in 1999 and 2005. There were some policies put in place that got renewables started, and then with the renewable portfolio standards specifically. And once they were started, once that first mover was there, and you started to see these technological advances of renewables coming down the cost curve and just becoming cheaper than other sources. And Texas has a particular kind of a market. It's often referred to as an energy only market, where really what that means is you're only paid when you produce energy, not for sort of like sitting on the sidelines as capacity being available. And we have something, and I know I'm getting a little wonky here, but like it's called economic dispatch, and that's just a fancy way of saying the lowest cost resource wins, right? We have a market where the lowest cost resource gets chosen. Well, wind really came down the cost curve very fast about 10 or 15 years ago. And we saw this big build out of wind. And then 4 or 5 years ago, solar started to cross over that inflection point where it was cheaper even than existing gas. And there's a lot of variables, right? We saw a huge acceleration in 2022. Putin invades Ukraine, the cost of gas skyrockets, and now solar is even more cost effective, and those cost declines are still happening. And now we're seeing batteries. This is the next wave. We at the time of Winter Storm Uri 4 years ago, we had 200 megawatts of batteries. We have 11,000 now, more than a 50x increase in 4 years. And that's not because policymakers said, we're worried about climate change, let's put a bunch of batteries on the grid. It's because batteries fell in price 90% the last 10 years and another 20% last year. And we have a market that allows it to get paid. So we are now up to the point where wind and solar are generating, I think last year was like 37% of the total energy consumed in the state was from wind and solar. Texas has produced and actually consumed twice as much renewable power as the next closest state, which is California. Most people don't realize that. Texas generated 2x the amount of renewable energy as California in 2024. And that gap is widening, not narrowing. There's a lot. You asked about transmission, you asked about challenges. I could talk about all of that, but suffice it to say, we're talking on May 24th. There's 9 days left in a legislative session, which is an eternity, and we'll see what happens there. But I think there's very broad support. Republicans and Democrats, business people, environmentalists, just kind of across the board. There's certainly opposition, but I would say there's much more support for renewables, particularly because it improves quality of life. It makes a better business environment. It drives consumer costs lower. It does all those things, and that's why it's winning in Texas.
I think that's so important. Like renewables are just simply cheaper here. There's a very strong business case for them. So thank you, Doug. Shadé, you've worked in solar energy for years, and you have a lot of expertise here. I'm curious about what are some of the challenges? I think you worked in Massachusetts on solar energy. What are some of the challenges that you've seen with when you actually want to develop a solar farm somewhere?
Yeah, sure. And I think the example of Massachusetts is interesting because when you think of states where solar has the most installed capacity, where solar is booming, you definitely think sunny states. You think Texas, you think California, Florida, and those are among the top 3. But among the top 10, you also see Massachusetts and New York that are not particularly sunny. New York State, not necessarily like a lot of open land for solar. They are upstate, but not in the city. And yet they're among the top 10 states. And the reason for that is because there have been strong policy push and strong incentive to make sure that solar has a place in the grid, that there's tax credit for companies that install renewable energy, install solar panels, and that there's also a way to sell it at a competitive price. So in Massachusetts, to answer your question, some of the challenges that we had, the first one was the interconnection queue. Like, so when you build a solar installation, to put it online and make sure that it actually generates electricity, you have to interconnect it to the grid. And that takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of, you need to have a lot of permitting. And sometimes there's just so many solar installation coming online at the same time that you have to wait actually for the utility to make adjustment to the grid to make sure that they can accommodate your installation. And that was one of our primary issue when we were developing solar. Another one was just navigating policy, making sure that we're respecting regulation, getting permit to develop in the land, and also making sure that we're doing it in a way that was good for the community. Like sometimes we got some pushback from community who didn't want their landscape to change, which is understandable, or didn't want a lot of construction in their backyard. Like there's a lot of NIMBYism in that industry. And some of the things that we did to mitigate that was first we had a community agreement. Every time we developed solar, we had a community agreement to make sure that we involved the town and the neighbors to plant trees around to hide the solar panels if they didn't want to see it. I also led a program called Pollinator Friendly Solar, where we plant wildlife, flowers, and plants around and under the solar panels to like improve the soil, attract pollinators, improve biodiversity, and just make it prettier. So like just an extra thing in addition to renewable energy having this biodiversity component. And that was really niche, but we felt that was like a new way to build solar a bit differently. So I could talk a lot about Massachusetts and the different challenges and the things that we did to mitigate them. But another thing that I wanted to say is about what Duke said on storage. I think that's also a very important component. We've seen in California a few years ago, there was a lot of issues around the duck curve. So the fact that during the day, there's a lot of solar generation, but in the evening, it drops without battery. And that means that a lot of other power needs to come online to compensate. And so there was some concern about grid flexibility and making sure that the grid will be able to support this. And battery can play a huge role there, because like if the solar power just decline at the end of the day, battery can come in its place. It's like really crucial. So I'll stop here, but fascinated to hear about solar. It's a really interesting subject for me.
Definitely. If the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, you need batteries to save that kind of energy. What's interesting is the University of Texas at Dallas has actually been a leader in some battery research and innovation, or so I hear. Yes, also solar is very interesting. When I was a journalist, I was working at the Arizona Republic. I'll never forget how I went to interview farmers who had basically lost all of their water from the Colorado. There was a drought, a federal shortage declared on the Colorado River. So all of the farmers in this one county lost access to the water. What you did see, though, instead of people growing crops and people would shift to different sources or use groundwater, you saw a lot of solar farms. So it was just kind of like reshaping American farmland, which is very interesting. So that kind of biodiversity component in solar and the community agreements, I think, are super important. Just zooming back out, I guess, a little bit more generally. I'm very curious, especially Kathryn and Ella, can you guys discuss climate action plans? Which cities in the DFW Metroplex have them? And what are some, and again, I know like recently, maybe it's not called a climate action plan. Maybe it's been renamed to something else, energy efficiency, or I don't know, something else. But which cities have them? What are some strategies that local governments have pursued to reduce emissions? And how successful have they been?
Yeah, so the city of Dallas has an award-winning climate action plan. We call it the CCAP, the Comprehensive Environmental and Climate Action Plan. We adopted it in 2020. There are some other local municipalities that have what they call environmental policies or conservation plans and things of that nature. Unfortunately, the other largest city in the Metroplex, Fort Worth, does not have a climate action plan, but there is a huge grassroots push right now for city leaders to adopt one. And I know that that's something that they've been working on really diligently over the past couple of years. But back to Dallas's climate action plan, we have essentially two big targets, and that's reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 43%. So the initial baseline greenhouse gas emissions inventory was taken in 2015. We will have another one at the end of this year, 2025. We want to reduce those by 43% by the year 2030, and that is not a long time from now. Our ultimate goal is a 2050 100% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions. So the plan has 8 main sectors and 97 actions, and the sectors are really everything that we've been talking about thus far. So it's energy efficient buildings, renewable, reliable, affordable energy, but it also goes into affordable transportation, zero waste, water resources. So it talks about a lot about flooding and drought, which are conditions that we experience here in the Metroplex and in Texas in general. We have a goal for green spaces, parks, and then clean air. And then the last one that folks really, maybe haven't thought about as much until recently is food access. We have a lot of communities that are considered food deserts here, even in a big city like Dallas. They don't have access to fresh, healthy foods. They have little corner stores and they have gas stations, and that is not the same as the fresh produce that you typically see and that more affluent neighbors in Dallas have access to. And so we are 5 years into our climate action plan. And I can say that we've done a lot. And when I say it's an award-winning plan, Brookings in 2022 said that of all the 50 states, of all the cities that have climate action plans, the Dallas's is the most achievable, most implementable. And that is something that we are really proud of, but it also takes a lot of work from not just the residents, but also businesses, industry. Really, everybody has to be sitting at the table for us to be able to achieve these goals. And it's really, really, really crucial, really important that that younger folks, that students become involved, that they are knowledgeable about what it is that we're trying to achieve as a community, and that they take up that banner and they also continue to march us forward on this. It's a long-term goal, and so we're going to need everybody.
Thank you very much, Kathryn. I guess quickly, could you discuss the scope of the CCAP? Is it dealing with emissions just directly that come from the city of Dallas? So like the police vehicles, the fire trucks, whatever that they commission, or like the whole kind of looking at like the whole Metroplex and all of those emissions?
So the measurements were for the whole city of Dallas, and it's everything. It's buildings. So we call those stationary sources of emissions. It's buildings, industry, those sorts of things, and then mobile sources of emissions. So that's your vehicles, your gas-powered lawn equipment, your blowers, and your lawn mowers, and those sorts of things. It's really comprehensive. It's everything, both.
Got it. And I'm very, very curious. We had an interesting conversation earlier about transportation. Dallas is a city where there are highways that can stack 4 stories, 3 stories. If you go to certain areas of the city, it's kind of a remarkable feat of engineering and innovation, and also, it can be a kind of a problem with climate change with implementing more public transportation. There's not a ton of density, and people tend to live very far away from, the places they commute to or socialize at or go out to eat, whatever. I'm curious if you could talk about like what like Dallas is and Ella as well. I'm curious about like the electric school bus initiative. But what do you think are both realistic, but then also that kind of like meet the urgency of the moment, like plans that DFW and Texas as a whole can do to reduce emissions from the transportation sector?
Well, I'll just talk really briefly because I really want to hear what Ella has to say on this transportation topic. But focusing in on transit-oriented development, where we're having, places where we live, work, and play be built, and be really considerate about how are we going to get from point A to point B using mass transportation. There have been some really scary bills that came out of the Texas legislature this session. And a lot of folks don't tend to be involved in that kind of advocacy, but I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to pay attention to what's happening as these folks are writing the bills that are going to impact whether or not entities like the Dallas Area Rapid Transit, DART, has funding, whether they have the ability to continue to operate in all of our cities, whether cities can pay into membership of DART and mass transportation. There were federal monies that were allocated for a high-speed rail line between Houston and Dallas. Those funds were taken away. And so, these political things are happening that are moving us backwards in the transportation realm, but also across all of the other climate realms that we try to look at. And so transportation is a really big one. It's an important one. But I think focusing our dollars and our advocacy to creating neighborhoods where we have everything that we need right there, and we don't have to go an hour away to go, find some entertainment or find a good place to eat or take our kids to the park or find a well-paying job with good benefits and those sorts of things. So I'm gonna pass it over to Eleanor.
And I'll actually zoom out a little bit, not to transportation, but to school district climate action plans. So it's not just a thing that a city government can do, but a school district can also pass a climate action plan or a climate action resolution through their school board. And this is a place where I personally have seen a lot of students take huge action in their community to research these plans with different nonprofit groups, or their teachers have been really helpful in getting them the data they need to put together what they think are the biggest issues in their school district, covering anything from like the city climate action plan, food, transportation, building efficiency, and electrification. And then they also have covered mental health around climate and how to help students deal with climate anxiety. And then climate education for students to really help them to be able to bring this forward generation after generation and teach each other about the many different technological changes that are going on right now in real time in their districts. And so that's not really an answer to the transportation piece, but I think that's just a really exciting place that students can make a difference in their communities, where they really, at least talking to teachers and parents, school boards love it when students come to them. They have a much more positive response a lot of the time because those students are taking the initiative and showing how much they care about what's happening in their backyard.
Do you have any examples from Texas or Dallas? I think you might have worked with some schools in Austin, but have you worked with any in the Dallas-Fort Worth region?
We have not worked with any in the Dallas-Fort Worth. I can share the Austin piece
It's
that
an opportunity for DFW high school students here, I guess.
Yeah, and Dallas has been working with, so I've worked with the Citizens Climate Lobby on the Great Electrification Challenge, and I know that both Plano and Dallas ISD, I believe, have groups working on that Great Electrification Challenge, and so they aren't looking at the entire piece of school district, or sorry, climate action resolutions. They're looking specifically at electrification, but that covers everything from transportation electrification to building electrification, and is a really awesome program that is nationwide, but has at least 2 in Dallas.
And what are some of the challenges that you guys have experienced with these kind of students lobbying for climate action plans at their school districts?
I think one of the challenges that students often face is just it takes a lot of time and being able to be resilient to getting no's from the first person you reach out to not being the right person. They might just never respond to your email, but that doesn't mean that nobody in the school district cares. It's just that one person maybe was not the one to reach out to, and being able to be flexible with that. And then also finding the right information and the right adult allies to really help you do that research. There is so much out there. So one of the things I hear from students a lot is just like, I don't know where to start. Like, I have the entire internet at my fingertips, and there's often conflicting information about different things. And so they will ask kind of, hey, what are the top 5 facts I need to know? And really finding ways to get there and just focus on, this is the challenge I'm going to do now. This is where I'm going to start. And I'm just going to keep making progress on this over time. And then figuring out how to pass it on to the next generation of students or grade below you. Often it will sit with like a couple students who are juniors. And then when they graduate, maybe it doesn't continue because there wasn't as much mentoring going on to younger grades. So, like, really getting other students excited with you, and not being afraid to like reach out to them and build a community around it.
Totally. I'm going to move on to a few kind of hot, maybe controversial topics. AI in data centers. They've been all over the news. They're being built over kind of remediated Superfund sites. They're going to drive a lot of economic growth, allegedly. No, I mean, probably reality as well. But AI, and it's a very hot topic at the UNDP Sustainable Energy Hub. AI and data centers, they consume a lot of energy. Even as we try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, this new technology is causing a surge in energy demand. So we're trying to increase efficiency and like use less energy. And yet now we have this whole other new factor that is going to require humongous amounts of energy. But at the same time, AI through operations like smart grids and other things can also increase efficiency. What are your thoughts on AI and data centers? How are they impacting Dallas and DFW and Texas? What kind of increased demand and have they put on the grid? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Does it depend on how we manage it, etc.?
Happy to jump in first. Go ahead, Kathryn. You want to jump in first? Go ahead, please. I'll add to you.
Well, I was going to focus in on not just the electricity and the grid demand aspect of it, but the water demand. And, there are parts of Texas right now that are in historical levels of drought. We've seen historical levels of drought here in the DFW area in 2011. I was working for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and we were having to make calls to folks that would normally be able to pull water out of the rivers to say, stop doing that. You're legally not allowed to do that. There's not enough water anymore. I had no idea that AI and data centers were using that much water. It was really surprising to me. So I've taken a few steps. When you Google something now, it'll pop up the AI, suggested. I've turned that feature off. And so there are little things that we can do. But I think not just the grid issue is something that we're going to have to look at, but also the water resource, which is finite. Water is very finite, especially in states like Texas. So go ahead, Doug.
That's a really, really important, excellent point. Thank you for bringing that.
It's a huge point. And I am trying to get smarter on AI. So take what I say with a grain of salt. And if other people on the on this panel or through the chat want to correct me, feel free. But my understanding is that you can water cool, you can also air cool. Air cooling takes a lot more energy, which means it's that much more important that it be powered with clean energy sources. Again, for environmental reasons, also for cost reasons, right? So this is one of those places where I can't overemphasize how big a deal it is that renewables are now the cheapest source, right? The IEA, the International Energy Agency, declared solar the cheapest form of electricity ever. And that was like 3 years ago, and it's still come down the cost curve more. So that makes a really, really big difference there. I'm just gonna say a couple things here because I have a hard stop at 1:45 to go to my daughter's theater performance. I cannot be late for that, or my daughters will never let me live it down. Just a couple of things here on the data center piece. It definitely, like, good or bad is too, right? Like binary and simplistic to like think about this, right? I think Zayna, you teed it up well as like good if, right? And I think the ifs are, Are you bringing a lot of clean power? And we were talking about batteries earlier. Like batteries are great for so many different things. We're talking earlier about backing up wind and solar with batteries. Great for that. Batteries are also great, by the way, for backing up natural gas, which particularly in extreme cold has big, big problems. And if you have enough batteries, you might have time to actually fix that gas plant and get it going again. It's also great as a backup for data centers, right? Data centers already have batteries on site. Usually they're smaller and called uninterruptible power supply. But as time is going and as batteries are coming down the cost curve, those batteries are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you're co-located with solar, not even co-located, but have solar somewhere else, wind somewhere else, you can charge up that battery. Data center flexibility is extremely important. To even zoom out further, demand flexibility, period, is really important. The reason I have this microphone is I have a podcast called the Energy Capital Podcast. I did one with a researcher out of Duke University, Tyler Norris. They did this study that said if 1% of the hours of data centers are flexible, we could actually accommodate 15,000 megawatts worth of data centers in ERCOT. This was a nationwide study. They looked at different regions in the country. So if you live somewhere else, you can go and look that up and see exactly for whatever region. But in ERCOT, in Texas, 1% of the hours being flexible, 15,000 megawatts. Put that in perspective, Houston, the third or fourth largest, it's about to pass Chicago, become the third largest city in America. Peak demand is like 20,000. So damn near a Houston worth of power with just 1% of the hours being able to turn down how much they're using, or if they can't turn down, shift to batteries that are on site. So I think there's a huge potential for these data centers. I do believe that the AI race is really, really important. There is a global race for really sort of proving out these technologies, and it is important strategically to have them in the United States. And Kathryn's absolutely right. If we're trying to water cool all these, water is a much bigger limiting factor, particularly in Texas, but I think this is probably true generally globally. Certainly not everywhere, but in a lot of places, than energy is, especially in this era of fast rising solar, particularly. And then I just want to just say just one other thing, just kind of in my closing, and I'm sorry I've got to jump because I want to hear, maybe I can watch the recording later and hear what, this is just a fantastic panel. And thanks again, Zayna. I really enjoyed hearing from everybody. What I think is so important here, and if I leave you with anything, is like whatever you're working on, if it's the electric school buses or it's energy efficiency or solar or what, public transit, whatever it is, to really focus on the benefits to people over the climate benefits. The climate benefits are incredibly important, but we have to recognize that like most people aren't as motivated as those of us on a call on a Saturday and Memorial Day weekend are. Kudos to us and to you, like everybody who's listening, like thank you. It is so important. And it's great to be motivated by that. But we have to understand that most people aren't. But what they might be motivated by is, hey, if you get an electric school bus or solar panels on the roof of your school, right? If your school district puts in place a climate action plan, you may not even want to call it a climate action plan, call it an energy savings plan, right? Because then we can have more money to put teachers in classrooms and books in libraries, although there's a lot of people that don't want books in libraries these days, but that's a different story, right? So focusing on those benefits to people, Shadé was rightly talking about energy efficiency and insulation. I spent a big part of my career working on energy efficiency. People are much more motivated by the comfort benefits they're going to get in their house. It's really drafty in this room, and I can't even go in that room in the wintertime. The energy savings are nice, the climate benefits are nice, but it might be comfort. So kind of meet people where they're at, really focus on the benefits to people. And I'm not suggesting, of course, that anybody doesn't do that already. I just think sometimes it's just important just to kind of like state that right out in the open, to just like, hey, let's focus on where people are at and what are the benefits. And the climate benefits are often for most people somewhere on their list, but maybe not the highest. And so figure out what is the highest on that person's list. Is if it's the CFO of your school district, that cost savings are going to matter to them more, right? If it's the principal getting one extra teacher because of the energy savings, that's what's going to be important to them. And so that I just think is just critical to our long-term success. And I'm sorry I got to leave early, but I really appreciate you pulling this together, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, Doug. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I know we're running out of time. I had a Kathryn, Ella, and Shadé, do you guys have to run right now, or do you have a few more minutes? Okay. I want to ask about nuclear energy quickly. It's a hot and somewhat controversial topic. Nuclear energy also is, I think Microsoft is developing like a nuclear plant to meet all of its AI demand. So how do you think it should or shouldn't be used to meet rising energy demand? And how can something that I, have thought about a lot, particularly with nuclears, how can we ensure that it doesn't create sacrifice zones where people near these nuclear reactor, like power plants, whatever, are just, they're like, oh, it's a rural area, there's less people here, you should move somewhere else,
I can try to start. I know it's probably very controversial. So I don't know if you've noticed, I'm from France, and you might have heard my accent. France's electricity grid is 75% nuclear, and it's also one of the lowest, the lowest carbon in Europe. So yeah, so that's just to start with like one of the positive points from nuclear, is that like if you have the capabilities, the financial resources, the institutional capabilities to develop it, it can decarbonize your grid significantly. It can provide like a good base load for electricity grid so that there's less fluctuation, and it can provide also a good base load in addition to renewable energy, which is what the French government's trying to do, like to have a good base load of solar, but also a lot of renewable energy. But yeah, of course, there's a lot of negative impacts around it, like especially around the radioactive waste. And as you said, like sacrifice zone is like, where do these wastes go? How is it maintained? And like, does it also affect other population elsewhere in the world? I think that's a really important point. How to build it so that the people around are actually safe. Like there's no such thing as a 100% forever like safe nuclear. There's always some kind of issues. And also one important point is the fact that aging nuclear facilities are very expensive. Like it's way more expensive than renewable energy, way more expensive than actually a fossil fuel. So maintaining them as they're aging, as they're becoming less safe is a real issue. So I'm hoping that as the technology innovate and there's more innovation around that sector, then it can be made safer and like for longer term. But yeah, there's still a lot of issues around it. One thing that I would say that I recently for work had to read the nuclear industry report for 2024. And what really shocked me is that this report is from the nuclear industry. They said themselves that in the future, right now, the part of nuclear in the world is becoming negligible compared to renewable energy. And I was really shocked when I read that, because it's supposedly information that's coming from the nuclear industry and saying that's okay. We hear a lot about a small modular reactor that are supposed to be more efficient, that are supposed to be cleaner, require less cost, less radioactive component. We hear a lot of their potential, like the fact that they can be built faster in like economies with less resources. But at the end of the day, renewable energy is building faster, is getting cheaper, is like, yeah, just better at it in a lot of points. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I still think like personally that for countries that have relied on it for a while and that have the safety resource to do it, it's a good baseload power. It just needs to be done in a way that doesn't create catastrophes in other countries. But yeah, I think there's a lot of a warning, especially for like I work more around developing countries, and the issue is that to have a nuclear facility, you have to have a grid that's actually stable. And not a lot of countries, for instance, in Africa actually meet that requirement. There's actually like only 4 countries that meet the requirement to even have a nuclear facility. So it's not for everyone, and there's a lot of caveat to include to have like safer nuclear. Yeah, and I'm curious to hear yeah, my co-panelists think about that, because I know it's very controversial.
I'm very curious actually, Kathryn, if there, what talks are in Dallas about nuclear.
I don't think I could put it more eloquently than Shadé did. I think she really, did a great job of showing like the pros and the cons. I think the hesitancy for a lot of folks around nuclear, it comes from having to be those grassroots advocates who say, not in my backyard, that these land uses, near communities where they could potentially negatively impact them are not compatible. And so that's where I think caution should be used. But as far as nuclear being a low carbon, alternative, I think, obviously it's been demonstrated in a lot of different ways in a lot of different countries to be a good alternative. So as long as, throughout the life of the plant, it's maintained and that people are put in front of profit and that throughout the plant's life, which includes decommissioning, all of these factors are taken into consideration. I think it can work.
And we're just gonna ask one more. We have so many fantastic questions in the chat, but I want to ask one question from Arav, who I think this is a question that a lot of people, particularly youth, are wondering. So, if we know that just a few countries and companies cause most emissions that lead to this is his question, that lead to climate change, why do climate policies still focus so much on individual actions like recycling or driving less? I think there might be a little bit of I'll let the panelists answer it.
I'll take the first go. So you may know that Texas is very pro-business, and the Environmental Regulatory Agency in the state of Texas has openly said, we are pro-business. We do not want to shut a business down if they are violating their permits. We'll help them come into compliance. If they violated their last permit, we're going to give them another permit. And so there's this attitude politically in Texas that businesses sort of have the right to operate, to pollute, to do what they're going to do, and that we should be supportive of that. Unfortunately, it comes down to these municipalities who do have the ability to still, despite current political attempts and past political attempts, to take local power away. We do have the ability to do some things. And you said, recycling, for example. We have the ability to divert a significant amount of waste from our landfills by educating folks, just like we have the ability to improve communities through, tree plantings or, air quality monitoring and, really empowering neighbors with not only data, but actions that they can take to become involved in climate action planning at the local level. And that is something that I think is really valuable. So educating folks and making sure that they know that, yeah, maybe, they're shifting the responsibility onto us. I think in some cases that's good. We do have a responsibility. We do have a part to play. And, although a lot of the pollution may come from, these multi-billion-dollar conglomerate companies, there are things that we can do as well, and I don't want to underplay them.
I think just one thing to add, and I'm sure Shadé, you might have some thoughts too. A lot of these companies, whether it's Shell or Exxon or I'm blanking on the name, the one from France, the big one that's all over the world.
Total
Energies is all over Lebanon, and I'm sure many parts of Africa as well. What they're doing is they're producing the oil that we use every day, whether for like the energy we use to like cook or like run our air conditioning or drive or all of these things. I do think maybe like the conversation on corporate responsibility versus consumer responsibility has been a bit out of whack. There's much more, I think, discussion needed. But Shadé, I'm curious to hear what you have to say as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just to add to what Kathryn was saying, I also agree that we do have a responsibility. I mean, it's an old debate about like the responsibility of the individual, the companies, the government. I think it's important to question, like, what should it be my responsibility? I'm just one person and companies like pollute the most. I think that's a valid argument. I do think that power is in the number. So if you recycle on your own, yeah, it's one drop in the ocean. It's not going to do much. If you take a train instead of the car on your own, it's not going to do much. If you push for your city or your state to implement a recycling program that's going to save thousands of waste to go to the landfill, that's impactful, and that could be started by one person and then growing into several people. If you push to have a low emission zone in your city or to have an electric school bus in your school district, that could start with just one person and then a group and then have a really cascading positive impact. So yeah, I think it's not just about the individual action, is what we can do collectively to bring about change like at the higher level, and to also influence policy, because I still think like policy is like one of the most important way to bring change in climate, in a like positive change in climate action. And for the companies, I also agree with what you said, Zayna. I recently heard about BP. So BP had before important plan to go net zero, to decarbonize. I'm not sure like what part of that is, you know, like just PR and what part of that is true, but they had public plans to decarbonize. This year, they decided to just scrap that entirely because they said that actually we see a lot of demand in oil and gas. We see that the signal from our consumers is not toward decarbonization. So actually, we're not going to focus on renewables anymore. And yeah, that's what they say. They say they listen to their consumers. So we need to be vocal. We need to, and I still think that the most impactful thing you can do in climate is, I would say, to vote, and not necessarily like presidential election. I mean, like even at the local level, like being involved at the local level for the mayor, for the even the like local school district, like every local level, I think is really important. And so I think that's the most important thing you can do. Pause here.
Joy, would you like to ask a question? Sorry, while we're waiting for Joy, please go for it. We're running out of time. I guess the one thing I would add, what policy does though is it tries to encourage people to change their behavior. So even if like your city implements a low emission zone, the goal is to get every individual to drive less through either taxes or encouraging public transportation in certain areas. So policy does it at a larger scale, but it's still trying to change one person's behavior. So I think that's important to note. We're out of time. And we have, I think, some of the panelists for the adaptation panel here. I see Leali's here, Kathryn is here, Amal's here. So thank you so much, guys, for speaking. This was a really, really excellent, energetic discussion. And I really appreciate all of you for being here. And I can say for myself that I've sorry, Joy, do you want to speak?
I jumped in the chat. I was just going to say, from like a CCL perspective, what Shadé was saying was very much in line with what we talk about: political will and exercising, not just voting, but even just knowing who our local officials are and having that relationship of even, hey, I know where their district office is, I can go drop by. And that's how we kind of exercise that at a local, like from what my chapter does of CCL, that we just go and drop off material, or if we know that that they're in town and, you know, like out of legislate, or, you know, in from Austin, that we try to leverage those relationships. So yeah.
100%. And a lot of this can be done through things like zoning or creating like another bus stop at a place where there's high traffic, or I know, Kathryn, reducing parking minimums has been kind of a hot topic in Dallas. Is something that the Sierra Club or maybe not the Sierra Club, sorry. I'm blanking on the name right now, but a lot of youth climate activists have pushed for. I think, like, what is the parking minimum right now in Dallas?
So we just did away with parking minimums.
Oh.
Just for context, in order to be able to open a restaurant or, build an apartment complex, the developer had to agree to provide a certain number of parking spaces. And sometimes that was really cost prohibitive for maybe a small restaurant owner, who just wanted to, let folks come and walk down and enjoy their food. So those have been done away with as of earlier this month. So it's a new time in Dallas, and we're going to see how that benefits us with changed behavior and modification of our transportation habits.
That's excellent news. And what a good note to end the panel on. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here and taking the time during your Memorial Day weekend.